seduction as well, right? So you should, to be technical, you probably have service/seduction, right? So service or seduction at an interpersonal level. You can have service/seduction on a socio-cultural level, right? Socio-political, whatever. Right? You can have service seduction at an interpersonal level. You can have service seduction at socio-cultural level. This was the example of sort of the political arena, the political discourse of seduction as an appeal to public opinion, the political discourse on service as an appeal to participation. So both of those. But Nietzsche, what he's interested really aren't these two levels. What he's interested is the discourse between service and seduction in sort of like a Buberian sense. I mean, not to evoke that, but between myself and God, right? And actually just be a one-way, at least for now, right? It's a one-way street. How can I serve God, right? What is it that I can do in order to serve God? This concept is reinforced by our socio-cultural understanding, obvious understanding of service and seduction, and our interpersonal understanding of service and seduction, right? So we have sort of a reinforced notion within our society, within our existence, right? A vast majority of our existence is defined by service and this appeal to public opinion, right? This is the reason why I've done a lecture series on popcorn flavored ice cream, right? Popcorn flavored ice cream has to do with the inability for me to recognize the true nature in which we can discuss freedom. It's a bit, I don't want to jump on that now. You can, put it in my YouTube thing and search for that video series. But sort of, these are the three different distinctions in service. Now, Nietzsche, again, what he said at the very end of bullet point 3, how to turn, right, the process of this seduction, this religious seduction, is a process wherein everything turns into this is a direct quote, right? Everything turns into a means of serving God in virtue. So at its most, according to Nietzsche, corrupt level, what would end up happening is that we would no longer focus on our interpersonal services and seductions that we require, right? We would no longer focus on our service to our culture, our service to fellow man, and not in some altruistic sense, but like what I'm doing now. The only thing that we would focus on would be our service to God. So that everything we do, right, everything, according to Nietzsche, and this is what he says one last time, again, quote, how to turn everything into a means of serving God in virtue. So all of these other layers, all of these other conceptions of service and the seduction required to appeal to a mass audience is insignificant, because all of that is sort of the peripheral or fundamental framework in which we can really talk about what's important. And the thing that's really important is our service and obedience to God, right? So this obviously is a method in which individual human beings can be conditioned to serve, right? And this conditioning isn't a socio-political or interpersonal conditioning, it's an ideological conditioning for service, right? This is an ideological right? It's an ideological conditioning for service. So that's what we have. It'll get deeper, right? I know right now it seems like we got deep, but there's actually a lot more to come in the discourse. Hopefully that's clear. I think it's clear. Okay, so number 4, I'll just erase some of this. All right, number 4. Oh no, sorry, just what did I do? That was number 3, sorry. This was number 3. And number 4 is coming. Okay, number 4. The discourse on service is then translated into a way of life. And this is Nietzsche, right? The discourse of service is then translated into a way of life. Nietzsche notes the following, quote, Christianity is a way of life, not a system of beliefs. It tells us how to act, not what we ought to believe. Right? It tells us how to act, hence the idea of conformity. I thought I wrote I used conditioning. Conditioning, conformity, I probably should have used conformity. But conditioning is just as good, right? It tells us how to act, right? We are conditioned, we are told to conform, basically the same idea. To read 4 again, this discourse is a way of life. Christianity is a way of life, not a system of beliefs. It tells us how to act, not what we ought to believe, right? So what we end up recognizing is, with respect to the notion of service, with respect to the notion of the seduction, the appeal to the masses, what we recognize is it's a way, this becomes service, and it should be to qualify it, because it's not just service in general. Yeah, service, S-E-R-V-I. Right? Service exclusive to God becomes a way of life. Our service to God, just as we saw with respect to transgression. In the last, maybe the last hour or 2 ago, I spoke about the idea of transgression. And what Nietzsche says is our transgressions against fellow men is insignificant, right? The fact that I have been harmed by another individual in no sense is fundamentally of import, because if you harm me, I should just turn the other cheek, right? So the idea of retaliation and retribution is insignificant. The only true transgression for Nietzsche that Christian morality recognizes is a transgression towards God. If there's a transgression towards God, then, you know, all hell is going to reign. But transgressions between men is of no significance. Similarly, my service to my culture, my service to other people is not significant, right? This is not of import. Obviously, we would say that this is of import. This is the whole JFK speech right here, right? This is the whole idea. And we all know all the interpersonal dynamics of, you know, sort of caretaking and family and love and affection and blah, blah, blah. None of that's important. Why? Because everything, according to Nietzsche, turns into a means of serving God, right? So that service exclusive to God then becomes the way of life. It's no longer about serving humanity. It's no longer about serving your population, your government, your whatever it is that you're trying to serve. Everything is situated in terms of a service towards God. Okay, that should be clear. Number 5, and this might be the last. How many more bullet points do we have in this piece? Number 5. Yeah, number 5. Thus, anything can be transformed into a discourse on service. The public has to be conditioned to serve, right? This idea of conditioning, and this is exactly what I put on the board, this idea of conditioning is an ideological conditioning. It has its basis in the socio-cultural, socio-political. It has its basis, obviously, in the interpersonal. But once we attain this ideological conditioning, we deny or rebuke service to others, right? And this is, you know, I don't want to go too far off topic, but as an example, we recognize that there is a state in which, I talked about this many, many hours ago, there's a state in which the individual divorces himself from existence. He conceptually, he is so, or she is so fixated on the afterlife, on the beyond, that there's a wholesale rejection of our embodiment. And then the individual can actually use this rejection of the physical to then cast judgment and punishment on everything that there is. You can imagine that if someone had the means, right? If someone had enough vitriol, if somebody had enough hate within them, they could then recognize that God is using them as a mode of punishing the world. And this is where you have fanatical movements and fanatical individuals, right? My way of serving God now is to rain havoc on the population And, you know, this is